Recording. Welcome to the American Diversity Report podcasts, where we interview change makers and diverse innovators. With me this time is a wonderful woman. Her name is Andrea J. Simon, and Dr. Simon is an international leader in corporate anthropology and CEO of Simon Associates. She is also an Axiom 2017 Best Business Book author of On the Brink, A Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights, and author of the new book, Rethink, Smashing the Myths of Women in Business. Yes. Welcome, Andrea.
What a pleasure to be here, Deborah. It's just truly a treat. I'm looking forward to talking to you and to your audience.
Great. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a corporate anthropologist.
You know, people ask me that all the time. And often they preface it by saying, I thought anthropologists studied small scale societies. And I said, what makes you think a business isn't a small scale society? And all you need to do is work with mergers and acquisitions a little to see how culture clashes can undermine even the best business decisions. I discovered, as you and I were chatting, I discovered anthropology as an undergraduate at Penn State. And I just, sometimes you find something that touches your heart in a way that's just captivating. And so I transferred to Columbia University to take really fabulous courses and finish my degree with the Conrad Arensbergs and the Mervyn Meggets and Sally McClendons, and really got into being an anthropologist. And I often laugh because when I met my husband, I was all of 19, and it's a long time ago, we've been married. He said to me, we were sitting on the beach, and he said to me, what do you want to be now that you've grown up? I said, well, I'm either going to be an attorney or an anthropologist. And he said, oh, be an anthropologist and I'll be here for you. And I laugh. I laugh because we both remember those words so well. At least in the mythology, our origin myth is about that. But it's been a fascinating life. I'm a very wonderful mother. I've got two beautiful daughters who are professionals. I've always been enjoying a professional career, but I found that I saw the world through the eyes of an anthropologist. I did my research on Greek immigrants, and I was fascinated with how people would say the same words but change the behaviors as they adapted to a new place. So the rituals looked nothing like they did when they came, but they fit so beautifully, and they made sense of them, and they said they were the true ways of doing things. I learned then the only truth is there's no truth. And then we went back to Greece. I went to Greece twice. The second time I took my daughters to do research on Greek women. And we spent 3 months on Antiparos and learned a lot about how women can control the success of their sons by controlling the food that they eat, by not giving the recipes to their daughter-in-laws. All kinds of interesting things that come about by just talking to people. What I learned is that anthropology is a lot about observing, listening, trying to make sense out of things that people pay no attention to, the nuances. I learned then, and I'm a real devotee of the neurosciences, that we live our stories. And once we have them in our head, it becomes our reality. Humans, I don't know, was it 75,000 years ago, we had this quantum leap in our brain and we could give meaning to things. You know, it wasn't a stone, it was a symbolic stone. And it wasn't just a spouse, it was a love. I mean, we have all of this context and the meaning of it. And as I began to become an academic, I got my tenure at Ramapo College, and I was a professor of American Studies. I had a postdoc, and I was working with Murray Murphy at Penn, and I was just fascinated at how people adapt and change. So that became sort of an area that was unusual among anthropologists. Most of the time we study steady states. We're not necessarily looking into the changes going on. And then by chance, my husband, all by chance in life, had a cocktail party at Citibank. He was an executive. And I was talking to the Citibankers about what I did, and they said, you should come help us change. And this was the beginning of deregulation. And I said, sure. I didn't know what I was talking about, but why not? So I took a leave I'd gotten my tenure, but I'm all to change. Am I going to do this for the rest of my life? I don't know. And I got into Citibank to help them take all of their folks from being good attendees. They came to work from 9 to 12 and 1 to 3. And if nobody stole, you were there for life. And now they wanted them to be accountable to sell and service their customers and cross sell them. And it wasn't long where I said, this is really interesting change. So I spent 14 years as an executive in three banks, and then I became an executive in two healthcare systems, helping them change. And I share that with you because I never stopped being an anthropologist, but they really didn't know what I could do. So they helped me help them do something they needed, which is, how do we change? We have to adapt. There was managed care in healthcare, there was deregulation in banking, and I found myself comfortable in those vacuums, and they were most uncomfortable. And they all wanted to go back to the habits of yesterday, and I kept pushing them forward to tomorrow. And then after 9/11, I launched my business, and my PR firm said, "Oh, Andy, you're a corporate anthropologist that helps companies change." And I said, "Yes." And I haven't changed that since. So that's a little bit about my story. And for those listeners who are curious how anthropology can work in business, man, my new book, my first book, On the Brink, was all about how anthropology could be applied to business. And I have the case studies of companies that were stalled or stuck, and they needed to change. And so once I began to settle in on who I was and what I did, they all hired me quickly to say, help, I don't know how to do this. And so that's a space where we find ourselves most comfortable, and that's where everybody else is most uncomfortable. So that's a little bit of my origin myth story.
I love it. I love it. Origin myth story. Absolutely. So tell me, how does all of this apply to the diversity, equity, and inclusion space that we're looking at so closely these days?
I'm glad you asked the question because I have to speak on it to a women's organization not long from now. But the challenges are profound. Think about it. We've grown up where the women have been outside, and now we're trying to bring them in. Or women of color have been treated very badly in corporate life and often had to leave to form their own business to do well. And now we have a big push on to do something which is a foreign thing. Talk about change. We want us to hire a more diverse workforce. We want them to be thought of in a more equitable fashion and included. And the burden has been put on the women to do the changing so that they fit. And all the research that we've been doing, you realize that it's a whole new culture transformation for two reasons, or three. The stories that they carry in their head, they're all the heroes in them. So the guys are the heroes and the women are the heroes, but they have to now begin to figure out what's a new story. And I'll tell you about how we work with them. The guys don't know what they're saying and why it isn't appropriate and why it triggers a reaction. They're just saying what they've learned to say over years. And they think in ways that are just the way they think. And the women haven't found a space where they feel like they belong. I heard Brian Hallahan from the CEO of HubSpot the other night, and we're HubSpot partners, and he was talking about how he formed his company with 10 guys coming out of Sloan, and they're all guys. And then he discovered he needed and wanted to be more diverse. And every time he tried to hire a woman or a woman of color, they didn't want to stay. They were they were the barbarians coming in to challenge the guys, and they didn't hang around very long. He said, so I was well intended but stupid. He said, because this was a male's club and I wanted to bring other people in without changing anything. And what you and I both know is that the language we learn early. The social interactions we learn early. And unless we go back and really change the way boys and girls think about each other, talk to each other, if the girls are doing better in school, the boys think that they are smarter, and the girls think the boys are smarter, even if the girls are doing better in school. And the teachers have a real important role to play in beginning to change the dialogue between the guys and the gals. But it's hard. The research is very profound. I can't remember the researcher's name, but she gave boys and girls blocks. And she was fascinated that the boys put them together into forts and became the pirates, and they were going to go steal the damsel. And the girls put their blocks into a kitchen or a nursery, and they all were taking care of the babies. And she tried to get them to switch, and they didn't know how. It was as if it wasn't genetic, but there was a whole lot of cultural role modeling going on. What was going on in their homes? And I do think one of the populations that worries me the most are the boys being grown up in an all-woman household, and we're mimics. We learn how to behave by watching the other like us do it. So if there's no guy around to do it, and we're not gals, how do I follow? Who do I follow? So there's all kinds of interesting complexity. Now, go to your question: diversity, equity, and inclusion. My sense and the work I'm doing is to begin to help people revisualize that story. And then when they begin to revisualize it, if they tell you a story about how it goes today and why it doesn't work, then I ask them to tell me a story about how they would like it to be if it's more equitable in a diverse workplace tomorrow. Now, as they craft that story, you realize they really don't know. They really don't know how they would like it to change. They don't know what the words diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. And they don't know what the behaviors would be appropriate. So we have a gap here. We want them to perform on a new stage, but we haven't given them a script. There's no rehearsal time and no applause. And so they go back to the old habits. So I do think we have a gap that's profound. And if we really want to make progress, we're going to have to change the methodology. It's not a training course. It's a behavior modification course.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and that requires some new techniques. So those are some thoughts.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yes, indeed.
Let's talk about culture.
Love it. And when my daughter was just a little one, I made a very conscious decision. You're going to love this. To raise her as if she were a pirate.
Was she a tomboy too, huh?
She was not. She
She was not.
loved pink clothes, but this now in her 40s, she is a force of nature, and in her job, I am sure everyone does exactly as they're told.
Oh, I think that's so funny. But to your point, I mean, you were a maverick as well. I mean, you had a wonderful career. I grew up in a family firm, and I almost want to call this book What I Learned at My Grandmother's Knees. Because from the time I was little, I was learning how to do things in the basement, putting shirts on hangers with Leo down there and watching my grandmother count money. I mean, my grandmother was a matriarch, my mother was a strong woman. And so I had a lot of role models of strength and of equity because this was partnerships.
Yes, oh, wonderful. And you're very fortunate, and I have a similar group of women, although I was the only girl among all the others, which made it a little more interesting. And it was, however, something, the legacy that we have from the women who, uh, in their everyday lives, were able to shape us in
Yes.
ways that we may not have appreciated back then, but we realize now very, very special.
It's hard for a woman who has not been raised that way to understand what she and the guys around her need to do to change the experiences. Because we can say things, but they don't have meaning. Remember, Anthro 101, data out of context has no meaning. So we can say those words, but out of context, they have no meaning. And it makes it very difficult to know, what do you want me to do? Why wasn't that good behavior? You
Yeah.
mean I really shut down that woman's idea? I didn't listen to her when she said it? Of course I did. Well, no, you did. Well, I've been in those kind of meetings too. It's really
I'm
interesting.
sure there are many of them.
Yeah.
It is our job, really, is to try and help people who, as my Aunt Selma used to say, they mean well,
Yes.
to be able to do what they're hoping it comes across as.
Yes.
And that's definitely a cultural shift. And maybe you have some actions that people can take to help them along this path.
Absolutely. Because we work with companies that need to change, it's not uncommon to begin to build a process of transformation. So, how do we begin it? I mentioned to you the storytelling. If you and we can talk about culture change as well, but if we begin about telling the stories about how we are today and getting them out there, often on big pieces of paper, so you can begin to we have to visualize what it is we're trying to do. So we visualize it. And then we begin to develop a new what's wrong with this? What are we going to eliminate and reduce to create something new? So we have a process called the 4 actions. And what is it that we don't like anymore that we're going to eliminate? And how will we reduce things that are really counter to the way we would like it to be? And what are we going to create and raise so that we begin to articulate that? And as we begin to shift it, then we lead to so what's the story for tomorrow? Tell us about if we did this, how would we visualize, not a vision, a visualization, and get granular? And once you get granular, if that's really how we're going to hold a meeting, so there are no silos, so everybody has exactly the same amount of time to speak, and then we begin to put the ideas up and count and conversationally, if you're going to really change and include, then tell me how. And then let's get down to what are the steps that we have to take. Let's get really good at that. How will we call the meeting? How will we set the stage and the agenda for it? We're changing behavior. It's
Yeah.
no different than a good diet. And then how will we have small wins? We often think we have to move the whole battleship, but we only have an oar. And small wins are extremely important to begin to get practice, begin to see it working, and begin to get an affirmation that these are the right steps to go toward that visualization. I sometimes do backward planning. That's where you want to go. Let's backward plan it. So then you can see the steps you're going to have to take to get there and what will you do tomorrow. Those are often the hardest tomorrows because I can get the big picture, but you want me to do what tomorrow?
Mhm.
And then I often do peer-to-peer coaching because sometimes it's better than having a mentor or an executive coach. You guys, if you've all agreed this is what we're going to do, then I'm teaming up a guy and a gal, and you're going to help yourself become more comfortable with each other. How am I going to develop inclusion? Do it by teaming them up. And here's a project you're going to work on and you're going to succeed together, not apart. So let's change the way we do things so we can get there. I use something developed at the University of Michigan called the Organizational Cultural Assessment Instrument. And if the listeners want to look it up, there's tremendous research on it. It's called the OCAI. And I'm a consultant affiliated with the folks in the Netherlands who have the license from Michigan to make it available online. So it's ocai-online.com. And it's a methodology for taking stock of a culture today around 4 archetypes: a controlling one, a hierarchical one, a creative one that's very ad hoc, a competitive one that's really bottom line oriented, and a very collaborative one. And as you begin to realize no culture is just one or the other, although I've had some are pretty off the grid, but as you begin to realize that you need a balance around these to have the best kind of culture, and I've got an article published in Forbes a couple of years ago on, we did an analysis of 6,000 people who had taken the OCAI, 3,000 men, 3,000 women, and the women all wanted a more collaborative, creative culture. And I said, oh, that's really very interesting. And then I found that the men wanted exactly the same. And that was sort of a wonderful statement about how people want to work together. They want teamwork, they want collaboration, they want creativity and empowerment. They want to be able to take risks and make mistakes. And they are not all that happy with the over-controlled or the highly competitive that push them to results that are tough. So for your listeners, I'll just sort of rehash. You got to visualize today, begin to visualize where you want to go, and begin to assess how the small steps are going to get there and begin to develop small wins to proceed. Because if you want to build a company that accepts diversity and embraces it, likes to include and wants to be equitable, those are words without meaning. And so as you concretize them, you can begin to give them actionable meaning that people can envision, and then you must tell the story over and over and over again because people will forget in a second. And if you don't keep telling them, they will go back to where they're most comfortable, which is the past. And that's another conversation about how our heads hate to change.
So to change the corporate culture, we have to look at the small things,
Yes.
look at the stories, to to think about not just big picture, but tomorrow.
Yes. And please, if you take a step at a time, there's a wonderful professor at Stanford whose name eludes me. I mean, he wanted to start getting into shape, and he was studying the triggers. And I loved his story. He was on a video I was watching. And he discovered that the trigger, if he, every time he flushed the toilet, he did 2 push-ups. He had a trigger to do push-ups. Talk about changing behavior on the edges. And he was talking about how that's the way we change. A trigger, an action, a trigger, an action. And next thing you know, he was doing 4 push-ups and 6 push-ups, but he needed the trigger to remind him to do the action. It's not so profound, but it's absolutely true. If you want to change your culture and have people be more diverse and inclusive and equitable, you better find a way of getting them to do it a little at a time.
Yes, indeed. I am not going to be flushing the toilet
Without doing a
without
push-up.
doing something.
I share that gently because sometimes I say maybe that's not appropriate. Uh,
It
but
may
he was
not
right.
be push-ups, but it'll be close. Oh my goodness, I love it. And so you can find these triggers in just the everyday life. It doesn't have to be exotic. It had or
Yeah.
abstract. Oh my goodness, I
Well,
love
you
it.
don't think about it as an anthropologist. If we dropped you into a foreign country and you didn't know the language and you didn't know how to order food or pay the bill or find a hotel, that's how people feel when you talk about, I want you to build a diverse culture. It has the same qualities. You want me to build what? How will we speak? How will we interact? What is it you want me to do? And how will I do it with? And so I remember getting dropped in Greece and having that feeling. Dembro maliso kala. I cannot speak Greek well, as much as I tried, but it does make you feel humble.
Oh yes, I can remember that happening to me. Uh, Graduating from high school and finding myself in Denmark by myself and trying to get
Ah.
some food, walking down the street to a bakery and not speaking a word of Danish. It didn't go well, and I tell you, I think they're still laughing at me in Denmark all these
But you didn't
decades later.
starve. I know.
Well, it's that kind of experience, right, is very enlightening. If
Yes.
people could use it as a tool
Yes.
instead of being afraid of it.
Yeah.
You
The
know.
challenge, though, which brings me back to our neurosciences, is that the brain hates to change. A, it lives the story. Your mind does exactly what it thinks you want it to do. So you're going to have to change that. It goes to the familiar, not the unfamiliar, the habits, and it really goes to pleasure, not pain. So if the guys are a group that really have a good time laughing together in a particular way, do I have to include the gal in the group? Isn't that's my pleasure? And as the woman comes into that group, does she make it more awkward? Is it making it unfamiliar? Do I not know what to do? So there's some real human qualities to this that can't be easily overcome through preaching.
That's right. Preaching does not help.
No.
It's really an art form as far as I can see,
Well,
and
that's a great idea. It is.
when you practice your art, you get better and better at it.
Yes.
And that's how it works. You get to be an expert, um, but you're not one to be.
But you said something important to emphasize. If you were an artist, you would see it. We decide with the eyes and the heart. We think we decide with the head, but we don't. And so unless I can see what you want me to do, so model it for me. Show me how to perform on that stage as opposed to simply telling me to,
Yes, exactly.
because I'll be very awkward, right? And you got to see it. So, and we're mimics. So if I see you doing it, oh, that's what you were like. I can do that. And so the monkey comes out. But but I do think we're on the brink of a transformation of our society where this can actually move forward today. I hope.
I think you're right. And years ago, I was a dancer, and I taught classical ballet to deaf children.
Wow.
Teaching something helps you. I love your idea of putting people together to
Yes,
collaborate because they have to teach each other.
that's
That
right.
changes what goes on in your
Yes,
mind forever.
it does.
Oh my goodness. Our audience is going to be so inspired by this interview. I know I am. Anything else you'd like to say that we
Oh,
haven't?
you and I could talk for a long time. I'm enjoying the conversation. It's hard sometimes to share what an anthropologist does or thinks, and it's easy for people to make assumptions about it, but difficult to know what that really is. Um, Other things I'd like to share, it doesn't. My hope is that people stop getting stalled or stuck. The impact of the pandemic and so forth has left a lot of people immobilized. And humans are adaptive. We're agile. That's how we've evolved. And so, if I could only preach to you a little bit, get your ingenuity, your imagination going. What we've learned is if you can imagine a different reality, your brain begins to believe it's true. So rather than fight it, imagine what you would like to see happening. People say, what's going to happen in the new normal? So don't wait, create it. It's a great time for you to build something new. And if you believe it, you act on it, it will happen. So you've got to see it, believe it, and act on it. And that's sort of a simple way of talking about how do you change. I can see something new. I believe I can do it. And I then take a step or two and, oh, I can play that game. I can hit the ball.
Yes, exactly. Oh, that's wonderful. Everybody out there, get your creative stuff on.
Don't wait because there's no need to.
Ex-
Don't waste a crisis. I will tell you that. I used to preach if you want to change, have a crisis or create one. I didn't expect this kind, but don't waste it. It's a good time to do new things.
As they say, the most creative place in the universe is at the edge of chaos.
I love that. That I hadn't heard before. That's
Chaos
terrific.
theory. Chaos theory. And it's where we are. So let's go
Yes.
for it. And thank you so much, Andrea. This has been wonderful. We are going to have to do a follow up sometime later in the year when the environment that we're in these days has morphed a bit to
Yep.
find out what you're doing now and trade notes. It'll be wonderful. All right.
Let's both of us try to find some illustrations of cases where things are changing. And that would be fun to share because if you can see it, you can believe it, right?
You got it. All
Got
right.
it.
That'll be wonderful. It's a date.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My
We'll be
pleasure.
in touch. And audience, thank you for tuning in to another American Diversity Report podcast. We'll see you soon again. Um, but I think you've learned something today that you need, and we'd love to hear your follow up, your feedback from today's session. All right. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.